Day had broken, and the world as we knew it fell to pieces. On every corner of the globe, devastating rays of sunshine have liquefied most of the human race. The anomalous phenomenon known as SCP-001 had made the most treasured source of light and life in the galaxy into the harbinger of a planetary apocalypse. In the streets of major cities, which were once so filled with culture and activity, melting abominations slithered along the sidewalks and pavement, a cruel parody of the crowds and traffic that existed in the world before. The drought-ravaged wilderness teems with countless globs of mutant flesh that were once proud members of the animal kingdom. Even the plants have wilted into an inert state, overwhelmed by the sun's energy to the point of being unable to photosynthesize it. There are no planes in the sky anymore, as no pilot flying on that day could escape the view of daylight. The boundless ocean is adrift with boats and cruise liners occupied by an aimless crew of amalgamations, which even the initial survivors on the lower decks and within the rooms have long since been assimilated into. In the early months of SCP-0011 daybreaks, the Foundation had been able to distribute rudimentary information on how to shield oneself from the perversive rays. This included a basic but comprehensive how-to guide on building protective clothing that would keep out all daylight. Unfortunately, there is only so much benefit these solutions can provide, as it has become too late to save the vast majority of humanity from their terrible melting fate. There are sadly limits on what the Foundation's foresight and knowledge could do to prevent a worst-case scenario, and many containment sites were lost within the first 24 hours alone. This means that the veil of normalcy that the SCP Foundation had fought so hard to preserve has effectively ceased to exist. Most, if not all, of the accumulated research, the containment procedures for dangerous anomalies, and the skilled personnel who were brave and foolish to think they could keep the world safe have met with terrible fates in this solar-scarred hellscape. If there was ever an era where the planet and the universe were stable and under the control of the Foundation and the O5 Council, that time has passed. This is not their world anymore, nor is it a world that can be ruled by any people. Day has broken, and this is the world of monsters. Today, two of these monsters in particular find themselves on a collision course. Both were once extremely dangerous Keter Class SCPs contained by the Foundation, but through circumstance and ingenuity, both anomalies had freed themselves and adapted to the harsh new reality of the outside world. They were known as SCP-076-2 Abel and SCP-682 respectively. Abel, now known in the fireside stories of human survivors as the Black Warrior, had given himself an armored makeover by forging his many weapons into a day-proof second skin straight out of dark fantasy media. This new edgy gothic look came complete with a massive sword that Abel could use to cleave straight through any fleshy freak show he encountered in the wasteland. He was a true living legend now, a mysterious hero, a violent demon, and a force of nature all at once. In the day, he stalked through the ruins of civilization, finding whatever passed for worthy opponents and cutting them down. At night, he would seek out those depraved souls who would prey upon their fellow human and put them to the sword. These malefactors had recently become Abel's favorite vermin to exterminate, since they always seemed so surprised to be on the receiving end of an ambush. Being a survivor in this hellish new world was difficult enough without the additional strain of plotting violence, so the ones who took advantage of the absence of laws and did so were either exceedingly clever or simply driven out of their wits by the desire to inflict harm. It was through several experiences stomping out the lingering scum of the earth that Abel discovered an unfamiliar sense of honor within himself. It wasn't that he grew accustomed to protecting frail humans from monsters, but rather the simple fact that a good fight required two mutually adversarial parties. Bandits and serial killers could routinely be counted on to have delusions of grandeur accompanied by ill intentions, while their hapless victims could not. In his own twisted way, Abel had accepted that showing mercy to cowards and weaklings suited his ends. After all, if there were no more innocents left alive, there would also be no more reprobates to menace them. His quarry needed something to bait them into emerging from the shadows after all. Despite having made the most of slim picking, there was a deep-seated part of Abel that longed for a real challenge. The Black Warrior wished to face a real monster like himself again, not the petty brutes and former human sludge he'd been using as substitutes. 682 would be an ideal opponent, but he hadn't seen the reptile since he was back in containment. The two had been made to fight each other the day before all of this began, and when during the containment breach that later ensued, 682 had a makeover of its own. The highly morphic lizard had tunneled its way out of Site-19 by evolving large scooping claws suited for subterranean travel. Being surprisingly intelligent for its animalistic shape, 682 had managed to torture the details of the SCP-001 scenario out of an unlucky researcher. While Abel had found a way to remain active during both day and night, SCP-682 had become a bit more selective in its schedule. This was possibly because the creature had adapted an internal clock by absorbing the previously mentioned researcher's wristwatch. While the sun was visible in the sky, 682 would remain dormant underground. There it could bask in the symphony of suffering from all the surface-dwelling living things it could perceive with its enhanced hearing. It would lie in wait for hours, anticipating the darkness of nightfall. Once the sun had set, SCP-682 would emerge and devour both human and abomination alike. As a being that harbored pure hatred for all things that lived, the reptile had far less discerning criteria for acceptable targets than Abel. It unleashed its wrath on anything that so much as got in its way during the nightly feeding frenzy. Another way that 682 differed from Abel in its post-apocalyptic way of life was that it hadn't been given any evocative nickname or title. The reason why was surprisingly simple. 682 hadn't made its existence known because any survivors that encountered it never lived to tell the tale. It was a surprise to both of them when late one night, a twist of fate brought the monsters back together. SCP-682 had just resurfaced near a small encampment of survivors and was approaching with the intention to massacre the panicking humans. As the hateful reptile drew closer, it noticed a dark figure lurking at the other side of the campfire. It was roughly the size of an average humanoid, but instead of running and screaming, the figure stood firm with an enormous sword in one hand. One of the fleeing humans cried out,
"It's the Black Warrior! We're saved!"
This amused 682, and it sported a sadistic grin as it ran toward the survivor and pounced. While the lizard had wanted to demonstrate how flimsy the human sense of salvation really was, the opposite took place. The so-called Black Warrior had intercepted its jaws and was blocking 682 with only his sword and all the superhuman strength he could put behind it.
"Go now, little ant,"
the Black Warrior said. Following Abel's command, the human fled, looking back over its shoulder only once to gaze at the Black Warrior in silent awe. With that straggler gone, the two monsters were now completely alone in the camp, both illuminated by the orange glow of firelight. They separated and began to circle each other. Memories of their old rivalry began flooding back as both of the now liberated Keter classes confirmed the identity of the other. SCP-682 began to laugh as it recognized the stance of the ancient warrior that had been such a thorn in its side back in containment.
"Isn't this priceless? The proud and merciless Abel has become a defender of those disgusting humans,"
SCP-682 said, wearing that horrible smile once again.
"I'm not fighting for them,"
the Black Warrior answered. He lunged forward, striking a hard blow against 682's carapace. The edged sword bounced upward in recoil, but not without inflicting a deep wound that 682's regeneration began to work overtime to repair. The reptile swiped at Abel with its scoop claws, then made further use of them by burrowing into the ground below. Abel knew better than to follow the creature underground, and he was almost sure that his scaly nemesis hadn't yet retreated. He held his ground and waited, steeling himself for the moment the creature revealed itself once more. As expected, the attack came from directly below. SCP-682 breached the surface and snapped its jaws around one of Abel's armored legs. Trusting his instincts, the Black Warrior struck back in the same moment. His sword stabbed into the reptile's jaws, and with a bit of strength, he leveraged his own leg free. The armor was dented, but fortunately there was no apparent holes left by 682's fangs. Abel had become accustomed to diligently maintaining the condition of his armor, as even the smallest crack could in the daylight hours cause him to lose his solid form forever. He'd made sure to do a more thorough investigation later, after the lizard had been put in its place. The Black Warrior fought defensively, minimizing the damage to his armor while timing his strikes to keep 682 from overwhelming him with sheer offense. He could certainly go all out if he chose to, but that same part of him that wanted a challenge was willing to prolong the conflict, especially if he could save himself the trouble of repairs later. SCP-682, on the other hand, didn't much care for being taken lightly, and was astute enough to notice when his foe wasn't as aggressive as usual. It had been over a year since the monsters had fought, but this time, there would be no Foundation personnel to end the fight prematurely. 682 decided it was time to give the armored edgelord an onslaught that he couldn't ignore. It began to rotate its tunneling claws like a pair of pneumatic excavators, and instantly showered the Black Warrior with dirt and debris as it burrowed back into the earth. Abel could deflect the rocks easily enough, but the temporary distraction gave 682 time to dig a large enough cavern beneath Abel's feet that the ground instantly collapsed beneath his armored bulk. Abel slid into the growing pit and straight towards the twin grinding claws of 682. He tried to use his sword in the ground to slow his descent, but the earth had been so thoroughly tenderized by his opponent that all he accomplished was hastening it. Just like an antlion larva, SCP-682 had created a death pit of detritus that was pulling Abel towards the center of its trap. As if making a whirlpool on land wasn't crazy enough for 682, the reptile grew itself an array of impaling horns across the front of its face and snout. Though constructed of flesh and bone, they had the appearance of serrated blades and possessed a sharpness and durability capable of penetrating through Abel's fancy new suit of armor. But the Black Warrior wasn't going to be defeated so easily, especially not after all the work he had put in during his latest life to forge these armaments. While clutching his giant blade in one hand, he conjured a new weapon from the shadows, a harpoon with a strong chain that appeared already wrapped tightly around his black gauntlet. Abel hurled the harpoon behind him with as much strength as he could manage in his nearly prone state, and as he hoped, its tip embedded itself in the more stable ground past the edge of the death pit. With the spear firmly secured at the other end, the chain went taut, and Abel was able to stop himself just short of falling on SCP-682's facial spikes. With a tremendous one-handed swing that would be impossible for a mortal man, Abel cut through the middle of the lizard's organic bayonets, rendering them practically useless. His metal boots dug into the slit, and with all his strength, he wrenched himself backwards towards the top of the pit, tearing the harpoon free in the process. With acute precision, he used the chain to direct the tip of the harpoon between the fractured bone blades and into 682's skull. The creature bellowed from the sudden pain and began to dig downward again, but by this time, Abel was on stable earth again and was pulling with all his strength on the other side of the chain. SCP-682 burrowed as furiously as it could, but the harpoon embedded in its head was throwing off its equilibrium. Abel planted his feet and kept pulling, summoning more weapons around his feet and legs to keep them from moving an inch back toward the pit. It was a titan's tug of war, and whoever gave in would surely be at the mercy of the other. Neither monster wavered, and the thing that broke under the strain was the chain itself. 682 tunneled away, harpoon still scratching its brain, and did not surface again that night, while the Black Warrior staggered as he retrieved his now broken length of chain. Abel waited for his hated foe to resurface, but the creature had apparently decided it was no longer interested in a fight. And it was just as well, because in the east, the sun was rising again. The Black Warrior moved inside one of the tents that the survivors had left behind and prepared for a full examination of his armor. While it didn't last, and no SCP save for SCP-001 could claim victory here, Abel was grateful to know there were still proper adversaries to fight after the end. Want to own an SCP of your own? Go to scpswag.com for premium anomalous merchandise. Now go check out Could SCP-076 Abel Survive SCP-001 When Day Breaks, and SCP-001 When Day Breaks SCP-682 to see how it all started.